One. Hi everyone. I'm David. This is
Hi, I'm Shaun.
we're wearing the same shirt apparently, or at least it looks like it. So we'll be doing a short, not so short, I guess, lecture slash round review. So we're gonna review a prominent round in which both of us were in, although we were in different rooms. Specifically the Belgrade Worlds semifinal. So what we'll do is we'll talk about our thoughts on the round and sort of our reflections on our own speech and how it fit in the round. This lecture has two objectives. So the first is the actual reflection on the round itself, which we hope will be instructive to people, because it is a very interesting round. It's a very high quality round. It is the World Semifinals after all. So there's a lot to learn from that. And then secondly, of course, is the meta level, which is how do you review your own speeches? How do you grow as a debater? Of course, there's a lot to be said about just debating and practicing again and again. But how do you make that sort of practice intelligent and reflect on your own speeches? So you'll probably see a link to the round below. We really recommend that you watch the round first, just so you have a better understanding. But we will give a brief summary of what went on in the round before we get started. So we'll answer the three questions I mentioned in turn, and hopefully you all learn something along the way. So let's first talk about our thoughts on the round. Shaun, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah. I guess okay, so I think it makes sense to contextualize the round itself in the tournament, I guess. Because I mean Belgrade Worlds is the first Worlds Asia one, as far as I know. I think for my team, our mindset going into the round was a bit I guess the best mindset you can have to debate, I feel, which is we thought we had nothing to lose because the year before I lost the quarterfinal to David actually. Um, and so like getting past that, no Singaporean team had been past the quarters for very long. So we were in like, I think a mood of like quite excited, quite can do whatever, which is not really a feeling that you always have in rounds. There are a lot of rounds I've gone into a bit more scared to lose. And so I think that was nice. And I think it speaks to, I think, the mentality of the round is that you go into in a round is quite important. So I do think Dion and I do quite well there. Probably our best speech of the whole tournament. So yeah, there was that. Thoughts on the round. So obviously we're commenting on different rounds. I think my round was Sydney in OG. That's I think Sam and Eugene. OO was Greg and XK from Princeton. We were CG, Dion and I, and CO was Ruben and Alec from Sofia. I think the round was I'd say was very high quality, I think. And the motion itself is a very tricky motion. And there's two things that I think in retrospect. The first is that the round, in some ways, I think a major weakness in the round is everybody sort of debates caricatures of the religions. And in many ways, that's I think how to say it's unavoidable. Because you've got 15 minutes to debate, honestly, a very big topic that asks you to pick between different fundamental premises of religion. And so I think in that sense, that simplification is not something I think is good. It is inevitable at that moment. Like there were points when I look back, and this we could go into this more in the speech, but I think it's a bit careless the way we talk about religion. And in fact, Dion and I were a bit worried that if like out getting to the final got media attention, people go to the speech, they'll be upset, which would be fair. So I think that simplification is something that's important. But the second thing is also it's actually really high quality. Like we got really, really pressed by Sydney in opening. And we did struggle to position our extension against that Sydney team. And I think the odd bench was pretty good as well. Albeit I think CO might be a bit derivative, and I think they would tell you that themselves. But overall, it's a very high quality room, I think.
So similar thoughts in my room. Our room was very high quality. We were in OG. The eventual world champions, BRAC, were in OO. Closing was, of course, the extremely good Chicago team. And CO was TCD Phil, who went on to win Euros, I believe. I'm not sure if the same year or the next year. So very excellent room. For reference, so the motion was this house prefers religions that center the self to religions that reject the self. We'll put the info slide in the description, but basically the motion is like religions that tell you your life is special, human and individual experience and existence is special, and choices matter. And then reject the self is like, these aren't special, you're temporary, unimportant, and like individuality creates unhappiness. So it's a good motion, but it's also extremely tricky. One thing we noticed about the round was that it was extremely characterization heavy, and the prevailing result of the round was determined by who best proved the characterization, at least in my opinion. A natural consequence of this is that as opening government, we were very happy because we felt we underperformed the prelims, and I was personally quite worried I wouldn't make the final again. And so we felt like, oh, making the semis, like quarters is I think the hard part, right? Because quarters you can still get dropped, but I think in semis it's like you have the opportunity to grandstand. You've captured the moment in your hands, and I'm pretty good at grandstanding, so we figured we could play to our strengths. And religion motions are also an Atenean strength. We have to take a bunch of theology classes in college, so we were pretty happy. But that resulted in us being actually quite convenient in our characterization. The eventual result was we advanced along with opening opposition, but I think this was both the opinion of the judges and also myself that it was for us, we were quite clearly second. Like there wasn't a real chance we were first. Um, and this was because opening government lost straightforwardly to opening opposition in the characterization battle. Closing government claims some impacts that are reliant on a particular characterization that opening opposition still defeats. And closing opposition claims a separate characterization that could be inferred, but it's not directly related to the motion. Like it's less hierarchy, which isn't directly related to centering the self or rejecting the self. So even if they do a very good job of proving it, it's like it's still a bit like it feels out of spirit. Um, which has a bunch of stuff to reflect on. I can talk about that more in my speech later. But what I want to ask actually as a question to Shaun is if you felt that had your position been swapped, like you weren't in closing, but you were in opening, would you feel like you would have had an easier time?
No, I think we have lost in opening.
Ooh,
I've
what's
actually
that?
thought about it a lot. Because basically what happens in the prep is that Dion and I realized that the motion was really tricky. And I think until I remember it must have been the 11-minute mark in the prep, we were still thinking. Like we hadn't got any semblance of an argument because we kept thinking what is the central thing that this motion is asking people to do. Like what is the central difference between these religions? And that's where Dion's whole push about the innateness of human experience and the sheer cognitive dissonance and all that that you force onto people. That's a conclusion we only reached like maybe at minute 12, minute 13 of prep out of 15. And so I think if you watch the round and watch the Gov bench dynamic, I think there's an argument for OG to progress above us. And we can talk about this more in the review. But I think if we had been OG, we would have been pushed into being like, let's just like grab whatever we've got and put it out on the floor. And I think then that would have opened the chance for Sydney in that position to think deeper and run basically closer to what we did. So I think the cleanliness, clarity, and the sorry, English is failing me. The strategicness, in Chinese it's 一针见血. Once you the astuteness, I guess, of the way in which we ran the case. I don't think we could have got there without the time to think. And that's, I guess, the BP dynamic. Yeah.
So that's one interesting thing actually is that mostly for BP, but actually this happens quite a lot in Asians as well, that sometimes the prevailing clash won't be clear until very late in the round. Because there are some Asians debates, right, where it feels like if you have a good PM speaker, you can sort of lock it down. But there are certain type of motions that are quite loosey-goosey. And so characterizations will float until they're sort of, like you're forced to accept them by like whips, right? Like you're forced to accept them as the debate that happened. Something similar happened to us as well. Although I think we had a bit of a different approach since we were opening, which is we took a maximalist approach. We just claimed as many benefits as we could. And we were like, yeah, centering the self reduces discrimination. It makes you happier and more confirmed in your choices. It makes religions more liberal, reduces conflict. And we try to claim as many benefits as possible. In hindsight, this is something that you could probably think about in Asians as well. if you think of yourself as a reply speaker or as a whip speaker, you could think of yourself as closing and trying to position your opening to win the debate for you. And it's just that your member speaker is your opening. But it's pretty interesting. We faced a similar problem, which is that I thought to myself, well, no, we faced the obverse problem. I thought to myself at PM, I don't want to be closing, because I thought this is the type of motion where you think of it and then you think of the arguments and you think, is that it? And then you realize all you've got left afterwards are like refinements to the characterizations that are hard to position, even though they could be equally materially valuable to the debate. Which in hindsight is also useful for Asians, because if you're a PM, right, and your dep has a hard time adding something, that doesn't mean you're out of constructive. It just means you have to sort of sell it in a different way. Okay, I have another question. Oh yeah, go
I'll
ahead.
jump in there actually, just on the BP agents thing, because I think one of the most illuminating things that was told to me by one of my old coaches was that they didn't prep too differently in BP and Asians. And what I realized actually, the thing about Asians is the best prep probably is a bit of a mix of what you were doing opening, what you're doing closing. And I think the problem in Asians often is when teams don't think through the round, then they get blindsided by the debate that happens later. Whereas if you were closing, you would presumably not have just been like, okay, here are some random arguments I can throw, but you'd have thought a bit more about where the round will end up. And so I think there's it's a luxury of 30 minutes prep that I think teams maybe don't use enough.
Yeah, what I've noticed actually when my Asians teams prep, so I've done UADC 4 times, which is an unnerving amount to do UADC, is that like they're all deliberative. Like we'll spend maybe 15 or 10 minutes after the veto making the PM case, and we'll chalk it with like 10, 15 minutes worth of content, and we'll just say, we'll tell the PM, sometimes it's me, sometimes it's Irene, and we'll tell them just cram as much as you can into your speech. And then the rest is just thinking through, can we add preemptions to the PM speech? And I think that type of thing is really helpful, even if it doesn't like seem to hit all the time. But like there are some times where you predict a response, that response could have killed your case, you would have instantly lost. I think that's super useful for Asians prep, especially. Use the full 30 minutes that you've got.
Yeah. One thing I used to do as well, because not Asians, well, a bit Asians. My last season of 3-on-3, I whipped. And I felt I really enjoyed the freedom to really think through the trade-off in the debate. I was trying to find out where the debate would end, and win that. So I wasn't responding to that on the floor. Often I was just running prep material. I didn't write it because I needed to be sure that the debate ended where I thought it would. But I think that's a value of 30 minutes prep that you don't have in 15 as an opening team really.
I did notice that as a strength of your teams, which is that the clashes seem pretty prescient. There's another recorded round online. Shaun and I talked a bit about this, the UADC 2023 round 7 on India rejecting foreign investment from China. And there's a very good response from Shaun there that I think is instructive for speakers, which is the clash is about, is the US strong or not? Because we care if the US can give funding to India. And the very useful bit of analysis there is, UP says, we're up. We say the US is strong, it's raising interest rates, which reflects the strength of its economy. The response is, but that doesn't mean they can lend. If you're raising interest rates, your money supply is lower, so you don't have the money to lend, even if your economy is strong. And that's a type of response that's like very well thought out. And you can only really have that if you give yourself the room to breathe and think about like what's happening in the real world, actually.
That was definitely either Kevin or Amy. I have no clue how interest rates and money supply work.
Well, I was reviewing this round though, but
yeah.
But reeling it back to the round we're talking about, the World Semifinals. Another interesting bit is to talk about the positioning of the round. So it's a semifinals. I don't think there's a lot of talk about there's so much talk about how break rounds change your attitude towards debating. I think one interesting thing, and this is true for both BP and Asians, is that when you're in a deep break round or even just a break round, I think the scrutiny that judges place on your case is much higher, but also I think the vibes are so much more important. I think if your team loses on vibes, it's much harder in the judges' head to convince themselves that you should win, especially in Asians where you have to beat the vibes of the other opponent. If it feels crushing, they're not going to give you the win.
Yes, I agree. I think that's the intangible that I never figured out. Like, partly because I could not figure out for the life of me how vibes work in an online debate. So in my speech, I made a very conscious attempt to win the vibe. Like I opened with this grandstanding, like I'm going for a first, fuck it. That's the exact quote that I used in that. And people have told me that was a like interesting quote, like an exciting quote. You know, it makes you really believe that something's happening. To be fair, Singaporeans, maybe we're all on a hype train. But I remember I consciously did that because I was like, I want to win the vibe. I don't know if it worked, considering we certainly did take the first. But yeah, like I think the vibe matters.
The vibe really matters.
Yeah.
I think the vibe is very also is special. It's quite special in Asians, right? Because in Asians, you have to win every round to win the tournament, right? So you can't drop a single round.
Yeah.
And it's like you have to keep running hot. It really feels like it's a different tournament. For us, I don't think we had any special vibes because I think it would have come off as a bit weird. Like, oh, this is so special to us. And I think that would come off as more like insulting than anything. Uh, anyway, but the final thing I'd like to talk about before I move on to the second question is how did it affect that how did it affect your debating that you knew you were going up debaters that were at, very, very high skill, whereas in a prelims round you might face like debaters that or like a team that's worse or a team that's much better, whereas in break rounds you ideally have like some level of power matching that they're also in the same semi as you.
I don't know. I don't think it made a huge difference to the way I saw it. I suppose, like maybe we were part of why we ran the case we ran is because we knew that there wouldn't be nothing simple left for us. You know, if it was like early in rounds, maybe you think, I don't need to think that hard. I'll just grab something that's more sure. Because Dion and I take a bit of a risk in that case that maybe in another round we would have prepped with the expectation that we were going to take a risk. So maybe there is that. But I think so we almost dropped the first out round. Like I think to this day, I think we might well have dropped that octo final. It's also online, so people can have their own opinions. But I think because of that, we were very careful. I think there was, I think a level of care that might not have existed to the same degree if it wasn't in round, which is not the right thing to do. It's just human nature, I think. Yeah. What about you guys? Because to be fair, you'd already done a semi-final before.
Well, my reflection, and I think this is general to tournaments, is that teams sort of grow and warp throughout the tournament. Like the team you are at round one is very different from the team you are in the semi. And it's like, I thought to myself, I faced some of these teams before, in fact, extensively. Especially especially the Brack team where we've debated against them a lot. And so I came into it with a mindset that this is a different team. Like you have to treat them with fresh eyes because they're going to surprise you. And I think they're going to approach it with like everything they've got because like in the end, no matter what seed you were, you're in the semifinal. And this is the same thing for any debate tournament, right? Which like if it was just based on seeding, you'd win based on the out round. You'd win based on your break position, right? But that's not the case. Upsets happen. And we were like, oh, we have to be the ones to do the upset. And it was like very interesting. I think especially in Asians actually, where it's like when you lose in BP, it can just feel like I positioned poorly. But when you lose in Asians, it really feels like I'm being pressed out of the round. Like you have to beat the team cohesively and across the board. BP you can advance just on a second, but Asians you have to win, which I find to be quite intimidating. I actually like BP a lot more than Asians because of that. But it's really intimidating, especially Asians, where you have to press up against a newly improved team and you don't know what's going to come out. But at the same time, it's also kind of exciting. Like you're also a different team. Like who knows what you can do, and it's sort of like a refresher. Like treat the world to a new Ateneo A or treat the world to a new whatever or a new SA, and it's like, okay, let the world see me.
Yeah, I have two quick inputs on that actually. One is so in that worlds, right? We actually faced Roman and Alec 4 times in a row. So they were around 9. We beat them. We beat them. They took a 4th. Then they clearly beat us in the octo and the quarter, and then we beat them in the semi. So it's one of those things where like you get so much familiarity with a team, that you so it's almost like you kind of know how they're gonna debate at some point, but at the same time you're a bit guarded, and also you keep thinking that there's that there's an opportunity for you. That every round is a new round. You can't take the team lightly. The other, like, what the new out round thing. So like there was, I think actually the first UADC, David, remember the one we faced each other at the first round at the semis.
2020.
And sorry,
This is 2020 or 2022?
2020. 2022 I was judging. But in 2020, I remember my team broke on 5. We were NUSA. And I think we were a bit annoyed to break on 5 because we made a lot of mistakes in the in rounds. And then we were 15th on tab or something. And then so I spent quite a bit of time between like the in rounds and out rounds trying to psych myself, because you've got the whatever 18 seed, and that's obviously a very close round. And then you got a second seed. And so we did manage to take Tokyo out that year. It took us out again. They took us out the following year. But I think that mentality is really important because there will be people who don't break where they want to at UADC. And the thing is, as long as you scrape that 5 wins at the break, and it's a whole new day the moment the console day is over. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really good insight. Like, always a chance to refresh. It really is a new tournament. Okay, we've talked a lot about the round, and then we've strayed a little bit. So now I think it's time to move on to the second question, which is reflections on your own speech in the round. I think it might be more appropriate that I go first because I gave the PM speech and then Shaun gave a whip speech. So I mentioned this before in my speech. In hindsight, we really were too convenient. So to contextualize, we claimed a lot of things about center the self religions, but the big characterization we claimed was that centering the self is non-prescriptive. We didn't say this explicitly, but it became apparent to us after the response from opening opposition that that was what we were implicitly claiming. That is to say, you center the self, but you get to decide what that self is. So it's like the self is your choosing, right? Like your free will. And the response we get from opening opposition after what is a smartly done but ultimately unsuccessful attempt to say if this narrative is a counterbalance, there are other things that make you individualistic, other things that make you non-individualistic, which is like that doesn't really do anything if there's narratives like that on both sides. Is a fairly successful response, which is to say, your centering the self could be prescriptive, which is yourself is a man, and yourself is a man who is heterosexual, who makes these life choices and has this as a family. And that would reverse all of the benefits we had, right? Because it's like, if you can choose yourself, you affirm good things about your life. But if you can't, then you're locked into something you might not agree with, or you're locked into certain life choices that you might disagree with. And then they say, if you're suffering, at least you can discard that suffering and treat it as unimportant if you just reject the self. All of this is pretty compelling. We respond, and then ultimately the response that defeats us is the likely characterization is one that prevails out of the historical context of religion. Religions are built out of a social, like there's a social order that they need to reinforce using values that are endemic to the time. Surdip has a funny line here, which like most religions are either before Jesus or after Jesus, which I guess is technically true in that that's like the total sum of human history. But it's around the time, right? Like 0.
Yeah.
And so it has the values of the time, and so it's unlikely that it would be super lenient to your agency or would have a super complex definition of yourself rather than just you're a man inside a man's body, blah 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 blah. This eventually I think is what defeats us, because then it solidifies that their characterization is right, ours is wrong. All our benefits are contingent on the characterization, and this is not really a debate where you can have a benefit free of a characterization. So in hindsight, we should have proven ours more, specifically the root level characterization, rather than assuming that because the info slide gives us examples, we can claim the implied things from those examples rather than just we should prove it. Okay. So that's my main reflection. My other reflection would be I speak too fast. This became really apparent because I speak a lot slower now. And I listen to my speech and I'm like, damn, this is what I sound like. So I understand why some people were annoyed when they debated against me in 2022.
You were a lot more pleasant to debate the year after, I think. I enjoyed debating against you a lot more.
Yeah, but those are my reflections on my speech.
Yeah, so I think my reflection on my speech, there's a bit of a history to it because I've been so my kids, if they're watching, will know. I tell them to watch videos of my debates I was in, not because I'm egoistic, because I'm lazy to watch more debates to talk to them about. So I've refreshed on this debate a few times. And I think in the immediate aftermath of the round, we were a bit confident, and I'm not normally confident after rounds, but I remember thinking that we had done what we said we were gonna do and take a first. And it took quite a while after that before I went and so we were not a first. We were the long discussion apparently. We advanced on a split 5-2, 5-1-1 something. Um and then I think after the like a long time later, I actually watched the whole debate and I realized like just how much I didn't respond to OO. And subconsciously, I don't think that's a wrong decision tactically because it's a BP. We only need a second. Um, but I think that's one of those things that the image you have in your head initially of your speech and the round might not cohere with reality. There've been other instances where actually also against XK where I watched back the debate and I went shit, I misrepped XK or I misrepped this speaker and I'll text them to be like, sorry, I misrepped. So I really hate misrepping. So I think that's important. That's also why I record my speeches. But you can't always record a debate, but if there is, it's great to watch back. Sorry, I realized this veered into the third thing we are gonna say. But I think the second big thing, apart from realizing I didn't rebut OO, is that I think both Dion and I in that debate take speech styles that or approaches that we've never done before or since. So I never before or since been like I win on 2 frames. First, if you put a gun to my head now, ask me to explain what a frame is. I can't. I don't know actually what it means. Like, I just think of it as contributions or things we are saying. And like that, I think surprises me when I think back. That we were that ballsy. To not even win on an actual argument. I win on a frame. I win on a context almost. Um, but I like that. I think it's one of those things that sort of only competition and majors pushes you into. When you're desperate to advance, basically. So yeah, I think my big reflection is I could have rebutted more clearly. But I think and I think as a result of rebutting not clearly, I think I make it a bit unclear for us. I also think I could have made Dion's outcomes a lot clearer because Dion's speech is extremely good. I think it's one of the best speeches I've seen in general. Like, yeah, it's a really good speech. High 80s in my opinion, but the outcomes aren't as clear. As a result of the more narrative approach that Dion uses to sell the member. And as a consequence, I think I didn't do my job in those regards. Yeah.
That's a very lucid reflection on your own speech. I especially like that last bit, which is that that's what majors do, which is the desperation pushes you to try things you wouldn't normally do. Um, I I I think this is also useful as a broader reflection on how people review their own speeches and how people think of strategies in debating, which is people are not actually good at assessing if this is a good plan or not. And a lot of the time we will discard approaches because we feel intuitively it's a bad plan. But if you think it through, like what's the harm, right? There are some speeches I've seen from certain people that I really admire that I think to myself, I wouldn't throw out this many frames, like 4 or 5 sort of throwaway ideas. I've seen Ignacio Villarreal give one or two of these speeches where what like one of these ideas kind of dumb or like kind of trying to win the debate on technicality. But if you throw out like 3 or 4 of them or 5 of them, like suddenly it's like, well, there are so many technicalities, like you might as well, right? And it's like you only need the judge to buy one of them. And I realize these desperation plays actually aren't so desperate. They don't have to be sourced from desperation, but I think it's like very interesting that you could try and take this to your training rounds, or to even your maybe not necessarily the first prelim round, but just like you can try things that you don't think would work, like in a reply speech, because you just have to try everything you can. Um, I think your other point was also really useful, which is rebutting. You need to rebut clearly and highlight the contributions of your partner speaker. This is especially useful in in Asian parliamentary, where what came out at PM is no longer what the judge has written down by reply.
Yeah.
So it's the job of reply not just to respond and to try and win by criticizing the other team, but also reminding the judge what their own contributions are. I think contextualizing your partner's case is maybe the most important thing a whip could do. Because like
Yeah.
ultimately you're not winning, right? You're not winning based on the PM or DPM's case. You're winning based on how the judge sees the PM or DPM's case. And I think being the whip gives you so much vibe control over it. So the next question, sub question under this, that I'd like to ask you on, Shaun, is so based on your own speech. So what would you say your learning was? Like, what did you take from this? Maybe not necessarily into the next immediate round, but into the succeeding tournaments.
Um, I mean, if I'm completely honest, my attitude to debating shifted after the world final. So I never thought I was the caliber to be a world finalist. And making the like, I don't see it as imposter syndrome. I was just like objectively, I don't put enough effort to be there repeatedly. So I think, before Madrid, instead of doing proper training, I went on a 1 month backpacking in Europe. So I was like, I'm there already. So the reason I go into that is I didn't take as much as I wish I had out of those speeches. Yeah, I mean, could we have done better in Madrid if I was a better speaker? Maybe, maybe not. I think circumstances were against us. You know, Asian teams in Europe. But I think what I guess when I reviewed it was actually before Australs, which I did a year later. And I think my rebuttals in Australs were a bit cleaner. I I hope they were. But it was honestly the biggest thing I took out of it was the vibes. Like just the well, one, the vibe of like some like the learning to just, I guess, go and try things. That I guess until I've been pushed to there, I hadn't been adventurous in that way, I think, in big majors. In fact, I think the year before when we lost to you guys in a round is also, I think, on YouTube. We just weren't adventurous enough in that particular round, even though Shami and I were normally adventurous. So yeah, I think that was the big takeaway I got in the immediate aftermath. I think the question is more interesting posed back to you, given that your Madrid run went a lot better than mine. So yeah.
That's a good point. First is I wanted to say that I think you still did really good in Madrid. And the second thing I will say is that like yeah, I think I also took my foot off the pedal in a similar fashion. Which is a bit rich of me to say because right after this one I think I did Australs. And then I think I also did I think UADC was before this.
Yeah, you did UADC, then Australs, then Worlds, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then that was a pretty successful run. But we weren't like I wasn't as crazy. I think because there was like pre-Belgrade Worlds and even pre-Korea Worlds, I was pretty manic about training. I would do a tournament every weekend, and then I would also wake up and I would do maybe 2 or 3 speeches. Before I went to Ateneo, where I would do a few more speeches. And I realized that I had hit a point in my career where just doing more speeches wasn't enough to grow as a debater. I actually think there comes a time in every debater's life. I sound like I'm giving the birds and the bees talk. It's like there comes a time where you just sort of have to learn more things about the world,
Yeah.
like, and you have to build your base as a human being. I think this is like maybe useful to transition from like if you're an elite debater and you want to be a great debater, you cannot get caught off guard by not knowing how things interact, by not knowing like what a rational, normal adult human being thinks, or like topics that you don't encounter regularly but you should encounter. And so I guess the big difference is I just sort of took a step back and I started thinking like, how would I persuade like my mom rather than how do I play the game of debate? I think I've always been a pretty earnest debater, but I think there was a change after Belgrade Worlds where I started thinking, how do I become an earnest speaker? You'll also notice a marked change in how I give my reply speeches because in 2021 I gave pretty aggressive reply speeches in UADC. I would say verging on mean even. And then I think in the succeeding UADCs, I gave much nicer, or at least sort of conversational reply speeches, just because I think that's the best way to persuade people. Okay, I have another. Oh,
I
sorry.
have
Yeah.
to jump in there. 'Cause I love what you just said. And I'm not sure I ever told you this before. I feel like post Belgrade, I like your speeches a lot more. For the exact same reason, I think. Because I think that and like I think on a broader level, there's a lot of debaters I feel who like train very hard, and like debating is a spiral, right? You get in some ways you go to 20 tournaments, you see roughly the same judges who are doing the same 20 tournaments with you. And I think there's a risk that you keep pandering to them. There was a time in my life where I read and did research, not for the sake of research, but just to win debate rounds. And I feel like when I broke away from that and I just trained, like did less manic debating, more thinking. I think my speeches got better as well. Like the way in which you weigh issues is a lot more real world. Your arguments are a lot more real world. And I genuinely think that no matter how many structural reasons you run, the real world will win.
Yeah, I agree.
It's easier to explain the real world. A well-read judge will know the real world, and the reason about the real world will appeal more. So like touch the grass. It's a very good way to improve at debating.
In hindsight, that's also a very applicable comment to my speech in the round, which was the characterization was overly convenient. We gave quite a lengthy definition of what center of the self is likely to look like. But I think the easier way to have done it would just have been asking the question, if you're a person in this religion, you don't necessarily believe the religion 100%, and you have other things going on in your life, what changes? Like your relationship to authority, your relationship to the importance of things in your life. Like a more realistic explanation could have just been like, you are told this, and religion might or might not prescribe it to you, but ultimately at the core, you believe that the self is important rather than unimportant. And like, wow, that's a much more lucid way of explaining what we spent 30 seconds explaining. Yeah. So in hindsight, these things seem kind of like just like like the bell curve meme, right? Where it's like use examples, 8 structural reasons, and then it's like a Wojak, and then a smart person at the other end of the IQ bell curve, and it's like use examples, right? So yeah, I guess that's it for the second bit where it's like, because we are straying a bit away from this. But yeah, in hindsight, I should have given a much more generous characterization and should have been much more realistic. And Shaun could have been, I think, clear with a rebuttal, highlight the contributions of their partner. Okay.
Actually debated basically.
Debating, I mean, you clearly debated enough to advance. The final thing we'll do is talk a little bit about what we've talked about before already, but in full, which is the how to improve as a debater, sort of summarizing what we did here as a general lesson we can impart. This time, Shaun, if you could go first.
Yeah. So I actually did a bit of this in the previous lecture for ABP. It's a bit vibey, the lecture, to be fair, but I think it covers a little bit. But I think that's fine because I think it's actually very useful to think about how to improve, and it's kind of things people don't talk about. One thing I say in that round, that lecture is talk to people as much as you can. So I'm aware how privileged that this might be privileged, because you need that familiarity. And I think Ashish wrote a piece on debating a long time ago. He pointed out that familiarity exists the most for like the better you do. But having said that, if you're in like a local circuit, you probably see the same people again and again. There are people you learn to talk to. So I mean, the first thing I'll say is recording your round is very important. Your speech is important. I like recording my own speeches. I listen to them back. And in doing that, I think the one thing I learned to try to do, is it's very easy to look at your speech and be like a judge and be like, okay, this one not clear, that one not clear. Yeah, this rebuttal a bit dumb, whatever. But like what I realized was a lot better, and what I try to do when I give feedback in general, to juniors or kids who have got a long runway with, right? So I'm a lot more interested in trying to reconstruct what the process of delivering that speech was. Like, so what were you thinking at that point? And that's sort of how I came to that conclusion I was giving about my own speech, which is I just didn't listen carefully enough to the OO team. I don't think I misrepped them. I think I simplified them a little bit, in a way that made me think I got them when I hadn't. So I think that like thinking through those processes is important. It comes with a lot of things, like strategic calls, like why don't I actually properly rebut the CO in that team in that round, which I don't think I give them enough credit. Well, I don't think I take them isolated and defeat them. Like, was that the right call? Which, to be honest, I think it worked, but was risky. So thinking through the process is as important as looking at the end product of the speech. The other thing I think, and this is where I was going with the whole talking thing, is it's really helpful to get perspective. So I think the best teams are teams where you and your teammate can talk about what you all did right or wrong. This is difficult, especially in a major, right? Like, I mean, there are times when it's a bit emotional to start pointing out what went right and wrong. And so you have to watch for that. Judges are helpful. I think they're like, be critical. You have to draw the balance between being critical and being humble. And that's a really difficult balance to draw. Because on the one hand, I don't think you take everything from judges, because there's a million different ways that people think about debating. None of them are right. They're just opinions, right? But some opinions might be better than your opinion. And so you have to, I think you have to take some of that and be humble enough to accept when you're wrong, while also being able to take that feedback. I also think it's like, I always tell my kids and my juniors, like, whether someone can justify the call right or wrong, doesn't actually affect whether they give good or bad feedback, in a sense. The link is not necessary. Yeah, so I think that's important as well. And the final thing I was gonna say is it really helped me personally to just talk about my speeches with people. So towards the end, I mean, partly because of familiarity. At UADC 2023, we faced each other 3 times, me and David, and our teams. Because like we got the curse round 7, round 8, and the semi. And to be fair, if you look at the tab, it looks like we got absolutely smashed by a 15-point margin. But like sort aside, like, okay, in my view, they were fairly close rounds. I think especially I kind of wish the semi was recorded. I think it's a good contentious round, even though it comes out 7-0.
A very close round.
Yeah, but
no, I really mean it.
yeah, I really enjoyed the semi-final. It's great. But I think I don't know how much it helped you, because I think that was the last major. But for me, we exact lineup was doing Australs, I think a week or 2 later. And so we literally went to like texted you guys and were like, do you all have thoughts? Even though we just debated. I think that's if you have that level of comfort, it's really helpful to get that opposing side as well. And obviously like people who are willing to help you. So yeah, I think reflecting on your speeches is a process, about the process and about getting as much data points and opinions as possible, and then you craft your own conclusions from that. Yeah.
Sorry,
Thanks so
much. No, that's a lot of good points. I only have one thing to contribute. I think Shaun burned a lot of turf. For me, the thing I'd like to highlight in growth as a debater and spurring on your own growth is, one, you want to try different things. I think a lot of people, when they hit a plateau, have a tendency to try the same thing again and again. I think it's nice to try different things to give you perspective. Try judging, to give you a new perspective on how to weigh. If you're a whip, try debating a different position for a tournament or two to see if maybe you're better at that position, or maybe knowing the demands of that position will help you become a better dep or a better whip. Like if you're a PM and you don't know what a dep needs, you'll have a harder time constructing a PM speech with impacts that your dep can pick up to weaponize. And I think that type of stuff is useful. The second bit is the thing Shaun brought up before. I think is really interesting and really useful, which is like, when you're debating, right, you'll try out different things when you're in a high pressure situation. You should prime yourself so that your reaction is to try different things rather than close yourself to the possibility of those things. A lot of people, their tendency in fight or flight is like flight. Like it's just do the same thing that's always worked. But like if they always worked, you wouldn't be in a troubled position in the first place, right? So you would be winning the round. So try different things. Give yourself the freedom to do it, because like, what's the worst that could happen? You lose, but at least you tried to not lose. Whereas you turtled in with the same losing strategy. So try something different. That's one of the things that helped us in a bunch of those UADCs, which was we were trying one thing, it wasn't working. Like we were trying a gov strat, it wasn't working because we were pretty bad at gov and we were much better at op. And so that's the way we approached majors, which is give like a pressure cooker and allow yourself to grow and expand in the pressure cooker. The final bit of feedback for growing is you should review your own speeches. This type of there's some things you can only see, as what Shaun said, after you've finished your speech and after you've allowed yourself to extricate yourself from the situation. You've stepped out of the haze, the berserker rage being a debater puts you in, and then you're like, oh, I did lose. I didn't respond. After every round, my gut reaction is to tell my partner, typically Toby, I think we won that round. And then or Miko, I think we won that round, and then or Luigi, and then they will say, maybe. So like only the there's a time has a clarifying effect. The sort of like you get to see what other people think, calibrate your thoughts on that, and also see what the responses were. Maybe in the grand scheme of things, where you focus on your own speech, your speech seems so important, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just a speech, right? In the 6 speeches you'll hear in that round, it actually didn't seem as important from your perspective. You captured the room, but that's because you're looking out your own eyes. So it's always useful to record your speeches if you can. I guess the final bit is, we can talk about how it changed how we approach majors after this. So I guess Shaun, if you can go to, and then I'll go and we can cap the session off.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think majors have this, looking back at myself in the majors and also the whole concept of it, because I guess I'm still tangentially involved, but it's a lot less important to me now. And judging achievements don't really matter to me, so I kind of judge with zero pressure. Like I think majors do tricks on you. The whole environment, everybody there. Debate is a very adversarial format. You're across the room staring at each other. The whole hype that goes around it, it's very pressurizing. And I think the approach I took, which I do appreciate, and I don't think I'll do it differently, but I think I was kinder to myself as time went on. Is I think you need to there's no point, I think, personally, for removing yourself from the hype of it all, because then why are you at a major? Right, like there's something riding on it, and that's what makes it exciting. But on the other hand, I think there needs to be a reasonableness with how you treat it. So like I said just now, my that Worlds run, so I made 3 major finals, right? And especially the first 2, we got there on like 50-50s. Like I can point you 2 rounds in those first 2 in the out rounds run that I thought we might well be out, and we sneak through. So like you need to lean into that hype and enjoy that hype, while recognizing that it is a game of 50-50s. And so if you're gonna gamble, you have to be willing to lose. And if you do lose, and it's unfortunate, but life will go on. And there are more things out there for you. And I think when you think that, it does give perspective when you're in the rounds as well. Yeah.
That's a good point. My main takeaway is really just I should give speeches I enjoy. And it's enough to be an earnest speaker in the sense that your ideas are technically earnest. It's another thing entirely to give a speech that makes you think, I would be proud to show this to my mom, or I would be happy to show this to my kids as an example of how you should debate. I think, especially in a major, the way I approached majors was no longer just, it's an opportunity for me to get personal accolades and achievements, but also a process of participating in like a communal activity, right? Like you're contributing all to the collective legacy and history of the sport. Like you're all going to be putting stuff that it might not be in a Wikipedia page, it might be on a Wikipedia page, but it's going to be like, some people are coming to a major for the first time, they're going to see your speech. What impression do you want to give them of debate? And most importantly, when you look back on your own speeches, like, is this a speech that I think is great? Like, you're gonna forget the speeches that were 80 but forgettable. Of course, they're forgettable, but you're gonna remember a 79 or a 78 that made you think like, wow, I was so crazy for running this. But wow, what a speech. Like giving a reply speech where I started it with like saying with shouting, "We read them like a book." Like I still remember that speech, but I've forgotten the countless other reply speeches where I focus on the technicalities of the debate. But I did not attempt to persuade the judge in a way I found to be persuasive myself.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like, I think being true to yourself is like critical. And it's like, I suppose it's one of those things, right? If you, it's a high pressure situation in a context, it doesn't really matter. I think the Liverpool manager said football is the most important of not important things in life. Really, it's kind of the same, I feel. So yeah, I think staying true to yourself is important. That's also, I think most people like to think of themselves as being intellectually honest, aspiring towards that. Being honest is good. And I think that whole like, yeah, staying like giving speeches you care about, that reflect your personality, I think is critical. Yeah, even in a major, even with the stress on. Yeah.
Okay, I think this is a good point to end. So thanks, Shaun, for doing this with me. So we hope everyone learned. I guess if you have any requests for other VODs to review, you can put it in the comments. But thanks so much for listening, and we hope you have a great day, and we hope you enjoy UADC. Okay, bye everyone.